Hey everyone, this is the breath work that we do on the very first session. So if you are new to Pilates, new to yoga, this is a really good video to start with because it really teaches you how we want to breathe properly, especially in Pilates. It definitely carries over into yoga, but this is definitely a Pilates specific video. We will do a couple of yoga breathing exercises, but if you're new to Pilates or you're wanting to kind of get into it, this is a really great place to start. So when we breathe, we want to breathe deep into the lungs. So through our culture and society, we've kind of learned to breathe with the upper part of the lungs. It's called shallow breathing. So the muscles in your neck and around your collarbones, they can be accessory breathing muscles, which they're really meant to only be helping you breathe when you're, running in a race or exerting, so trying really hard. They help you get that last little bit of air that you need when you're trying really hard. However, because we spend so much time sitting, cell phones, computer use, that sort of thing, a lot of people have learned to just kind of use those muscles to breathe all the time, lifting up on the rib cage to create space, when ideally we would be breathing deep into the lungs and getting the air all the way in. So in order to do that, there are a couple cues to help you learn how to breathe deeper into the lungs. So number one, keep the shoulders and neck as relaxed as possible. If you're sitting here breathing and your shoulders are rising and falling a lot, that's a good sign that you're using a little bit too much of the upper chest area to breathe. When you're doing these breathing exercises, the shoulders should really stay still and relaxed. So a good time to practice this would be in front of a mirror, so you can see whether or not your shoulders are rising and falling. The other thing you want to think about is breathing in through the nose. If you can, if you have allergies or something, it's not a big deal. But if you can, breathe in through the nose. And when you breathe in through the nose, we're setting the air deep into the lungs. Then you breathe out through the mouth. I'll talk a little bit more about the breathe out a little bit later on. But when you breathe out, you want to breathe out through pursed lips. This is specific for Pilates. Through pursed lips, kind of like you're blowing on a birthday candle. So let's say you've got a cake with, however old you are, many candles. You're not trying to blow them all out. So it's not a really forceful, you're not trying to get all of the air out. You just want to make it audible. So it's just a gentle, you're just trying to make those candles flicker. You're not trying to blow them all out. So it's a gentle, not quite a whistle. So you don't have to purse really hard, but a gentle purse. So you should be able to hear it. The person next to you might be able to hear it, but the person out in the hallway cannot hear it. It's not that loud. And one of the reasons we do that is because as you're doing your Pilates exercises, you might notice, oh, I can't hear you kind of get used to hearing yourself. So then if you are doing an exercise or something, you kind of notice that you're not hearing yourself, and that's a cue that you're not breathing correctly. Okay, so it's an inhale through the nose, exhale through pursed lips. Gently pursed lips. That also has to do with engaging the Transversus Abdominis, which we'll talk about later, or potentially even in another video. Well, it depends on how long this takes me. So another good way to learn how to breathe deep into your lungs, not only just thinking about it, sending it deep into your lungs, but where your rib cage expands. So earlier I talked about the accessory breathing muscles. Those are lifting up on the rib cage to try to make space for air to come in. That's not the ideal way to breathe in a resting state. Ideally, we want to expand the ribs down underneath in the low ribs. So one of the good ways I like to learn how to do that, the other thing I want to talk about is the diaphragm before we get too far into it. So your diaphragm sits in that same area that I was just talking about. It sits here, kind of domed up. So your guts are here, your lungs are up here, and your diaphragm separates the two. So when your diaphragm contracts, when it activates, it actually tightens and flattens. So the muscle is shaped like this, it activates, it flattens. What that does is it pulls down on your lung cavity. It's kind of like if you have like a bath time squirty toy, you squeeze it out, then you put it underwater and you let go, and that pulls the water into your squirty toy. It's the same kind of concept. When your diaphragm contracts, it pulls down, so your lungs are the squirty toy. They're pulling in because now they've got that space. I hope that makes sense. So, but the idea is that your diaphragm is moving down into your guts, making room for your lungs to pull in more air. Making space with your upper chest, like a lot of us do day to day, isn't ideal because you won't get as much room, and then you're adding extra tension in the neck and shoulders. It's not the only reason you'd have tension in your neck and shoulders, but it can definitely contribute. If you're always using these muscles that are not meant to be used all the time, it can add extra stress and tension up here. So if you're someone who always has a lot of neck tension, you might start noticing, kind of being mindful of how you're breathing. If you notice while you're at your work or whatever you're doing day to day, if you're doing a lot of breathing up here and not getting it deep into your lungs, that could be contributing to some tightness. So I like to teach a yoga breath. This is the only yoga breath we'll do this whole time, and this is also the only time you should let your belly go completely. They don't usually do this in Pilates because we don't like to teach to just let your belly totally go, but I find it can be really helpful when you're learning what it feels like when your diaphragm is working correctly. So it's called belly breaths. When you inhale, you let your belly get really big, like you're pregnant. When you exhale, you just let the air go, okay? What that does is letting your belly get nice and big allows your diaphragm a little more space to come down on the inhale. So instead of expanding the ribs, we're expanding the belly just to learn how the diaphragm feels. Once we get that feeling, we won't let the belly go anymore. We'll keep it in and we'll start learning how to use the ribs instead. Okay, so for belly breathing, you'll inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. When you inhale through the nose, let the belly get big. So let's try it. Inhale, the belly get big like you're pregnant. Exhale, just let the air go. For now, don't worry about pursing your lips. Just kind of open the mouth and just let it escape by itself. Okay, inhale, let the belly get nice and big. The diaphragm will come down. Try to relax the shoulders again. Be really mindful about how it feels right around in your lower rib cage when you inhale. Return to a resting state. So hopefully letting the belly get nice and big might have made you feel like you could let the diaphragm go down and send air deeper into the lungs, keeping the shoulders relaxed. Okay, now we'll do a little trick to help feel how the ribs should be expanding. So instead of the belly getting big, we're going to keep the belly in just like you normally would, not totally relaxing, letting it get big, just keeping it at a resting state. We're going to try to learn how to expand the rib cage. So a lot of people are really tight around the rib cage because they're not used to using that. So if you struggle to feel it at first, don't be afraid, just keep practicing. Also keep stretching, that helps too. So to start, you can either stay seated, and I didn't talk about my seated position, but I will really quick. Ideally, it's kind of like a meditating seat. So hips over knees, hips above the knees, helps with the alignment of the spine. If you're sitting totally flat, your back will be in imprint position, basically, so your low back is flat. It's not a bad position to be in, especially when you're doing Pilates exercises, because it helps you engage the abs. But when you're in a resting state, when you're sitting on a chair or you're standing or you're meditating or you're doing breathing exercises, neutral is a good place to be. I'll talk about hopefully in another video. The alignment of the spine a little bit more, not going too far forward, not going too far back, but being kind of right in the middle in neutral. So it helps to sit, if you're on the floor, sit on a cushion. If you're on a chair, have your feet flat on the floor. Those are kind of your two options. I like to be seated during breath work and learning to use your transversus abdominis and pelvic floor, because the position that you are in seated helps with your spine alignment and helps you engage your pelvic floor. We'll talk about that a little later though. So for the ribs, either sit with if you're on the floor, bring your feet to the floor and your knees up in front of you. If you're on a chair, you'll bend forward. So either way, hands come to the shins. You round the spine, so you'll be looking at your lap or your belly button. Keep your belly button pulled in gently. Keep your shoulders relaxed. On the inhale, try to send the air low into the lungs. You might feel your back expanding under your shoulder blades, maybe a little lower. Exhale, just let it go for now. Inhale deep into the lungs, let the ribs expand. Exhale, relax. So from the side,
from here to about here is where we want to feel the expanding. Try again. Inhale. Exhale, relax. Try to keep the shoulders relaxed. One more time. Then come back to your resting state, neutral spine. So hopefully in that position, you can maybe feel your ribs expanding a little bit with your breath. If you don't feel it at first, keep trying. You don't necessarily have to sit and do it for a half hour or anything like that, but just call it quits for a while, come back sometime later in the day and do it again. With all of these breathing exercises, I like to tell people to do a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, as opposed to picking one time of day to do it all. Because the more you can teach yourself to do it in little spurts more often, the more natural it will feel to do it throughout your day normally. The goal is that we go forward into our lives just regular, breathing more properly. Breathing more proper. There we go. I think that's what it's supposed to be. So in Pilates, we're teaching you how to breathe correctly during Pilates, but the hope is that then you take that breath pattern out of the Pilates studio. You won't be, sitting at your desk, but you are hopefully doing a more efficient breath by breathing deeper into the lungs on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so we've talked about the diaphragm, we've talked about the rib cage. The other place you want to expand is underneath the arms. So around where like your bra strap would be, or men, pretend you're wearing a bra, that's where you're expanding towards the arms. So the back of the ribs, like we did in the bent forward position, and also around underneath the arms. So in the next one, imagine that you're still rounded forward. So you're still trying to get that same spot behind in your low ribs to expand, but you're also trying to get under your arms to expand as well. Tummy stays in neutral, so don't let it get big. Just keep it kind of tucked in. Inhale, expand deep. Exhale, let it go. Try to keep the shoulders relaxed and still. Inhale, expand deep. Exhale, let it go. So now we've focused all on the inhales. Now we're going to talk about more of the exhales. So far on the exhale, we've been just letting it go. Now we're going to focus a little more on the gently pursed lips part of it. The exhale is important in Pilates because that's when we start learning to engage the transversus abdominis. And the transversus abdominis is your deepest layer of abdominal muscle. So you have your six pack, whether you can see it or not, it is there, the little chiclets right in the middle. Those flex the spine, they flex you forward, sit-ups, lifting the legs up, that sort of thing. Your obliques, there's actually two layers, internal and external obliques. They're mostly around your sides. They bend you side to side and help you twist. So you had your six-pack muscles, your rectus abdominis, you have your obliques on the next layer. Now the deepest layer closest to your guts is your transversus abdominis, or TA is what we call it a lot too. And that one is actually connective tissue right in front. So no really muscle tissue right in front, but from the sides all the way around almost to your spine. The fibers of your transversus abdominis run this direction, so around you. So that means that when they contract, they shorten that direction, which means it's a compression. So it compresses you in. It's a very supportive muscle for your spine and your posture. So the makeup of this muscle is an endurance muscle, which means like your bicep is not an endurance muscle. Your bicep, you curl it, you contract it, you use it, and then you're done. An endurance muscle like your transverse or your erector spinae, those are long, skinny muscles along your spine to keep you upright. Those have to be working all the time. Don't get intimidated. You shouldn't have to think about it all the time. But for the same reason that we've started to breathe up here, we've also kind of stopped using our transverse, lots of sitting. So in Pilates, we work on engaging the transverse and pelvic floor. It's in the same category of muscles as far as endurance goes. We've kind of forgotten how to use it. So in Pilates, we work on intentionally activating it. And then so the hope is, like breathing, going forward in daily life, you're activating it more to support the spine more. That's why working on transversus abdominis strength and endurance can be really helpful for people with back pain, because it helps support the spine. And so there's not so much pressure back there. Okay. So when you activate your transverse, it's a compression. It's not necessarily a bending forward. Now in Pilates, we do a lot of spinal flexion using the rectus abdominis, using the obliques, but also using the transverse at the same time. So you can do spinal flexion, you can do ab work without really using your transverse, but that's not the ideal way to do ab work because you want to use all of it, not just that one rectus abdominis or not just the obliques. So while you're doing ab work, you should also be compressed. So we're going to put that into practice just a little bit. I'll talk about pelvic floor in a little bit and then we'll be done with this video. So the transverse should be feeling like a compression. A lot of times in Pilates, I'll say pull your belly button into your spine. That's just an easy way for me to say engage your transverse, but it's not just the belly button pulling into the spine. Like I said, there's a lot of connective tissue in your transverse layer of muscle in the middle. So if you pull your belly button into your spine and don't activate anything else, you're not really truly activating your transversus abdominis. But I say that a lot because it's kind of a reminder to compress it in. So if you hear me say in classes or private sessions, belly button to spine, what I'm really saying is all of it. I know it can be kind of confusing, but I found that just saying that is kind of more, it's better as just a cue, not a really, instructive, pull your belly button into your spine, you're good. It's just a reminder, activate your transverse, okay? So to learn how to do that, it's actually best to lay on your back, but we can do it seated as well. So when you pull your belly button in and compress all the way around, another thing that's good to think about is your ribs. So some people have what's called rib flare. You can see it when you're laying on your back the best. So if you lay on your back and you can feel your ribs or feel your ribs sticking out, your ribs are kind of like this. We want to use the transverse and the other abdominal muscles to pull them back into alignment. So think of it like a corset. So your transversus abdominis is like a corset. It's pulling in. So when you exhale, we're going to do a couple practice rounds. When you exhale, you're pulling your ribs down and together, and you can actually use your hands and kind of press. Sometimes it's hard to feel without using your hands. So for the first couple, I like to lace my fingers, put my palms on my ribs. Let's just try the ribs first. Don't worry about the transverse yet. So inhale through the nose, deep into the lungs, let the ribs expand. Exhale, use your hands and kind of pull your ribs in and together during the exhale. Again, inhale, let them go, expand. Exhale, pull them down and together. So the ribs are tucking down and in. Then we can add the transverse, the corset type feeling. So when you do that, you start with the ribs, then you pull everything in, pull the belly button toward the spine, but also try to compress around the sides as well. It's a lot of head space. So if you're starting to feel a little overwhelmed, that's normal. That's kind of why I made this video, because a lot of times on the first session, I'm telling you all of this and it's a lot. And then I'm like, okay, now practice this at home. It's really hard to remember everything. So if you're starting Pilates, this is a really good video to watch a couple times a week, really. Anyways, okay, so you're pulling your ribs down and together and you're compressing in. So let's try it. Inhale deep into the lungs. Exhale through pursed lips. Compressing all the way around the abdomen. 2 more times. I'm going to skip and talk about the pelvic floor a little bit, and then we're going to come back again to the transverse. If you don't really know if you're feeling it correctly, don't worry about it yet. I'll show you a trick to kind of feel it in a little bit. So your pelvic floor, this is why I'm seated. Your pelvic floor holds up your organs, right? So most women know what Kegels are. That's tightening the sphincter around the urethra, your pee hole, basically. But we want to do more than a Kegel. So a Kegel only uses a little bit of the pelvic floor. Engaging the whole pelvic floor, it feels like you're kind of lifting up on your guts. So think of it as like a capsule, like a pill. So your diaphragm is shaped like this, your pelvic floor is shaped like this, and then you have your tummy going around. So you have this capsule shape from your low ribs to your pelvic floor. So when your diaphragm expands, it comes like this and comes back. When your pelvic floor contracts, it sort of lifts up and then relaxes. Again, your pelvic floor is an endurance muscle like your transverse, so you kind of want to be using it all the time. So you don't need to really bear down. It is possible to do too much in the pelvic floor, and then you can have some other types of dysfunction that way. Emily at Elevate Wellness and PT knows all of that sort of stuff. She specializes in that. So if you have any pelvic floor dysfunction, she would be a good one to call and get on her schedule. So we try to work on pelvic floor engaging gently and then releasing. And then over time, you kind of teach your muscles to be engaged a little bit all the time. Keyword, a little bit. You don't need to go around clenching all the time. It's too much. It's possible to do too much. When you do too much with your transverse, what happens is your transverse turns off and other muscles turn on. If you do too much with your pelvic floor, it's usually just like the muscles get a little too tight, and that can cause some dysfunction in other areas of your life involving the pelvic floor. So the reason I'm sitting is your pelvic floor, the weight of your guts on your pelvic floor actually helps your brain engage those muscles. So if you're laying down, try to engage your pelvic floor. It's a little bit harder to feel it. The other thing that's nice is when you're sitting on something, the contact of your bottom on something else helps your brain activate those muscles. It's like if you've ever done PT or personal training or something, if I'm telling a client to use their glute muscles, their butt muscles, sometimes I will poke their butt muscle really hard because that actual physical contact helps your brain know what muscle you're trying to use and turn on that specific muscle. So it's the same concept of sitting on something, helping your brain know where your pelvic floor is, and that's what you're trying to do. I recommend clients do this when they're driving as well. Once you kind of get practice, you don't have to think about it so hard, so you can do it driving. Please don't crash. Oh my gosh. At the beginning, I like to tell people if you're going somewhere, before you get out of your car, do 3 breaths with a pelvic floor engagement. Kind of make it just a little miniature habit, okay? If you're like me and you're usually running late, by miracle, if you're on time somewhere, or heaven forbid, a little early, sit in your car for a few moments, do a few breaths, engage pelvic floor. Not only is it good for you to learn how to use your pelvic floor and your transverse, but it also helps calm you down and helps relax and de-stress. Any breath work, okay? So we're gonna try working on the pelvic floor a little bit. The pelvic floor is also a synergist with your inner thigh muscles. So if you struggle turning it on, you might take a ball and sit with your knees like if you're sitting in a chair, a ball or a plump throw pillow or anything. It doesn't have to be an exercise ball or a wadded up sweatshirt. It doesn't matter. Something between your knees, and hold that thing between your knees. Activating your inner thigh muscles works with your pelvic floor. So just by a trick of holding your inner thigh muscles contracted helps you engage your pelvic floor, okay? So sit comfortably. We're doing everything now. So ribs, compress like a corset, and engage pelvic floor in that order. So inhale deep into the lungs. Exhale, ribs down and together. Engage transverse, engage pelvic floor. So it's kind of like the Kegel, but lighter and more muscle recruitment. So not just the Kegel, the whole pelvic floor is just gently lifting up a little bit. It's not very dramatic. You don't have to bear down. I like to tell people both with transverse and pelvic floor, 60%-ish effort, okay? If you try really hard, like I said before, you can get some too much tightness in your pelvic floor, or your transverse will turn off and your other muscles will turn on. So here's a trick to feel if you're working with your transverse or not. If you find your hip bones, your ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine, your hip bones, sorry, that was a little much, move your fingers, first 2 fingers, right to the inside of those hip bones. So there should be a soft spot. You might have to dig. Even small people will have to push in really hard because it's that deepest layer. So you have to kind of push in through some muscle layers. Okay, so relax. Keep that pressed into on the inside of your hip bones. Laying down, it's a little easier to feel this, but we can do it seated too. So you inhale deep. Exhale, ribs down and together. Engage transverse. You should feel it tightening under your fingers, and engage pelvic floor. Inhale and relax. You should feel it loosen under your fingers. Exhale, ribs. Transverse, feel it tighten. Pelvic floor. Now the tightening under your fingers should kind of feel like saran wrap, so it shouldn't push your fingers out. If it's pushing your fingers out and they're actually moving out, you're probably overdoing it and recruiting your obliques instead of your transverse, and that is what is actually pushing out. So it shouldn't move your fingers out it should just tighten under them. You should just feel it tighten. Because it's an endurance muscle, it takes time to get it to come on consistently when you want it to. So that's another reason why I tell people do a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, as opposed to saving it all for one big chunk at the end of the day. Because with that endurance muscle, you might lose it after a few. It might just get kind of tired, fatigued. Okay, so let's do a couple more. Remember, ribs, engage, transverse like a corset, engage pelvic floor, gently lifting up. You can continue to hold onto your inner thighs if you're not sure, otherwise hands can rest at the knees. So sit nice and tall. Inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. Ribs, transverse, pelvic floor. Inhale deep into the lungs. Exhale, ribs, transverse, pelvic floor. I also encourage people to do this lying down. It's harder to feel the pelvic floor, but it's easier to feel the transverse, the abdomen. If you do it laying down, feet on the floor, knees tented up, holding onto that ball or sweatshirt or whatever it is that you can hold between your legs. Okay, inhale deep into the lungs. Exhale, ribs, transverse, pelvic floor. So I know that's a lot, but continue to practice it. I like to tell people even just 5 times here and there. You don't have to do it a lot. Again, it's 60% effort-ish. We're working on endurance muscles. So a little bit here and there can be really helpful. Work on it in the car, work on it when you first get up in the morning, when you're still lying in bed, when you lay down to go to sleep at night. If you're somebody who has a hard time falling asleep at night, it actually can be really helpful to do this breathing as well as other breathing patterns to help you fall asleep, because it kind of down regulates and helps you relax. So my new clients, this is a really great video to watch. I know it's long, I'm sorry, but it's a really, really good review. Feel free as you kind of practice with this, if you want to skip to certain parts in the video, feel free to do that. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments or message me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I appreciate you all for watching this video. Have a good one.